Statistics is life and death. When statistics is life and death, or how math may save your life. So today I'm gonna tell you a story, and I'm gonna show you how sometimes situations may arise where everything you've learned in this class and all the things that happen to you in this class, you're gonna be like, oh wow, I'm really glad I took this class. Because I was really glad I teach this class in this moment. So we're going to start with a backstory, but basically, sorry, a little farther there. On August 21st, 2014, they offer a routine blood test here every year, and I always sign up for it. I think it's a very good thing to get your blood work done every year. It's just a good thing to do for your health, your general health, even for young people, because you think you're invincible, but this disease can strike anybody. But I got a routine blood test about a week later, not quite a week later. The phone rang in the nurse office. My wife was one of the school nurses at that time, and she answered the phone. And they said, one of your teachers has to come into the hospital like right now. And I said, or she said, well, okay, who's the teacher? And they said, Roy Tomlinson. And of course, my wife's on the phone talking to the doctor. If it was some other teacher, of course it would still bother her, but you can imagine what she was going through at that time. So we went to the doctor, and then they checked me out, and they said, you know, your white blood counts are really low. And so at that point, this was August 28th, they pulled a bone marrow test, and they drilled into my hip and pulled out bone marrow. And then from the time I went home to my house up in Higashikogane, about a 10-minute bike ride from here, I was like, it's Thursday, the day before our first game in football. I said, how about I just go to football practice? And they were telling me I could probably get sick if I wasn't careful because my white blood counts were so low. But I said, I'm just going to go to practice. So I was on my bike, the phone rang, it was my wife on the phone. She said, the doctor's just called, you got to just turn around and go straight to the hospital. Okay, so I was literally right over here in Musashino Park. I turned around and went straight back to Musashi Sakai. Okay? I didn't know at that point that I was going to be in that hospital for about 75 days straight. I hadn't packed anything, nothing. I just went straight to the hospital. So this idea of cancer, it's the last thing you want to hear, but in some ways it opens your eyes to a whole new world. When I got into the doctor, he said, hey, you sort of hit the lottery of leukemia. You know, when he diagnosed me with leukemia, he said, don't worry, you have an 80% chance of living. You know, we got an 80% way. You got an 80% chance of being cured, and the probability of my disease is 1 out of 250,000. So only 1 out of every 250,000 people gets this. So it's quite rare, and I can talk about sort of the nuances of this thing. Like, it's not genetic. They don't have any rhyme or reason as to why somebody would get it. You know, it's not like I ate bad hot dogs as a kid or anything like that. Although it might be, but we don't know. I did a lot of coping through writing when I was in the hospital. I wrote a lot, as any of my colleagues will tell you. And I do want to talk about treatment in Japan, just from the emotional side of it. The people there at that hospital were really kind. They still stick in my heart. Every time I go to the hospital, I want to go up to the 4th floor and see those people, but I'm not, you know, of course, they're probably not there, the same people, but they were all so kind. And I remember one particular time I was stressing out because I was getting really bad headaches from the medication, and the nurses started writing me notes, but they would use Google Translate, I think, and they, you know, you can just see the kindness in their voice. You know, I'm sorry I couldn't speak English with you, and, you know, and remove your pain, and, you know, let's try hard together to cure your disease. You know, just really sweet and kind people. So the experience, though difficult, also had its moments of beauty. Okay, and so on this day, August 28th, the doctor came in after they diagnosed me, and fortunately it was a form of leukemia called acute promyelocytic leukemia, APL, and when you if you have this particular type of leukemia, it can be diagnosed by a doctor without having to go to a lab, so they can actually see it under the microscope. Basically, without getting into the details of the disease, it's basically like your bone marrow has turned into Lord of the Flies. Does everybody know that story? Anybody where all the teenagers are on the island, but there's no grown-ups, and so everything goes crazy. So basically, your bone marrow has become sort of immature. They never mature. They don't produce white blood cells. They just play, for lack of a better way of saying it. Okay, so the doctor hands me this article from the New England Journal of Medicine, and this is, note the date, July 11, 2013. So this is like literally just a little more than a year before I was diagnosed that this article came out. So this is really cool. And the doctor says, well, you're going to have a choice between the two treatments in this thing. One of them we have expertise in, the other one we don't. So now they're telling me they don't have much experience in actually doing it, but it's worth having to look at this study because you have a choice. Fortunately, the school has a good medical program, medical insurance, so I had a choice of two programs. If you're on the Japanese insurance, there's just one choice. There was no two choices. Okay, so this is the article. Yes, that's true. That's arsenic trioxide, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So we're going to look at page 1 of this report. What I expected was a bunch of like medical mumbo jumbo, big words, things I didn't understand, and there was some of that, but what I got was really something different. And so I'm just looking at first page, and I'm looking at words that popped out. Go ahead, say it. Random assignment. Okay, we've got random assignment. Okay, this is making sense to me. And then chemotherapy. Why would that jump out at me? Because it's scary. Because it's just scary. You think you're going to lose your hair, and it was scary. Well, I see a proportion, 75 out of 79. I see, what else do I see here? Wait for it. This thing's running a little behind here. I see, what are those things? Looks like p-values. Looks like p-values, doesn't it? Looks like p-values. There's another p-value. I see a bunch of p-values for studies. So it looks like something, these are things I understand. So when I'm starting to read this, I'm realizing I got something here that I can read and understand, particularly around the statistics of it. So I was kind of psyched, actually. So I'm thinking, okay, now I don't have to just rely on the doctor telling me what I should do. I can actually read this and understand it. And let me tell you guys something. You could too. Right now, you could read this report, and for the most part, you would understand the stats behind it already, based on what you've learned just so far in this course. Okay, and that's pretty cool to feel that feeling of okay, I'm empowered a little bit. It's not just me accepting what the doctor said. Now, when I read this thing, it's got a list of, there's a study here, and this study was 2 different treatment programs. One was chemo with this chemotherapy, traditional chemotherapy with a pill called Atra, which is an uber giant dose of vitamin A. I'm going to tell you those pills are the worst bane to my existence. Every time I see them, like cut pictures of them on the Facebook group or whatever, it makes my head ache because those things gave me a headache for about 9 months straight. It was not fun. But they also had that compared to the Atra versus arsenic trioxide. Yes, literally they're giving you an offer, hey, how'd you like to have arsenic directly injected into your veins every day for months? But this is what makes sense to me when we look at that study. Does this look familiar? Look what you have here. Randomization, 2 treatments, and what's going to happen at the end? What are they going to do? And they're going to compare the results. That's exactly right. So each treatment section, okay, so this was the one, this is the arsenic trioxide. So basically you're in the hospital for 30 days, you go till you do what they call complete remission, then you get some sort of small break, and then you go in for 30 days in the hospital. They give you a couple weeks off, 30 days in. Each one of these represents a hospital stay. Okay, so you're in for 30 days, out for 30 days, in for 30 days. So when I got diagnosed with this, they told me you're out of school for a year. You know, you're not going to work. The good part of that is, when I got diagnosed, I went to Mr. Ladd, who was the head of school, and told him Ortwine can do this. And she was the intern. She came in, kicked butt, and we never let her go. So we got Ortwine also as a result of this, which was really cool. So anyway, continuing, and then they had the chemotherapy techniques, which tells you exactly what you're getting there. And the Atra was the pill that was the giant dose of vitamin A. You take those on and off for 15 days, and yeah, those were the baby of my resistance. And again, here's the results, and what the two different studies, their populations, and what all the information about them. What's the median age for each group? You can see when you have random assignment. So what they did was, it was a bunch of doctors in Italy. They gathered up a bunch of people that had this disease all over the world, and they said, we'd like to do a study with this arsenic trioxide and Atra versus Atra chemo. And so both of them have been shown to work, but they wanted to know if one was better than the other. Okay? And so they went through this whole thing, and here they are at the end. They start with 77 and 79 subjects, random assignment, therefore it's not going to be an exact, sample size for each group, and that's okay. You got males and females relatively evenly split. And you can go through, and I'm happy to share this with you if you're interested, but at the end, there'll be a comparison of a lot of different things, but one of them is overall survival rate, which to me was the most interesting. And so again, this is sort of the details of what happened to people, whether they died, they discontinued. Like for example, when I went into treatment the first time, when they first started injecting me with this arsenic, my liver function went absolutely crazy. It just went crazy. And so I thought, they told me that they had to cut off the treatment for a while because they thought my liver I was like days away from liver failure. So what did I do? I plotted all my blood tests and put a linear regression and tried to predict the day I was going to die. That's actually true. I did do that. Maybe next class or so I'll show you that regression analysis where I said, oh, that's the day I'm going to die. Fortunately, they pulled the plug on the treatment and then weaned me back onto it, so my liver was able to tolerate it. Okay? But down here was the profound moment for me, was when I looked down here and I saw 65 out of 66 who adhered to the protocol for 24 months were still alive. Over here, 65 out of 72 were still alive. So I started thinking, this is introduction to chapter 21. So we're going to introduce chapter 21 today through the lens of my cancer treatment. So you've got two things going on here. You've got chemo and arsenic, right? Two different treatments. And the proportion of overall survivors is what I want to know. Okay, so if a null hypothesis, if we think of, I'm not going to go into the whole draw it out because we're on a time crunch a little bit with this quiz today, but if I go, it looks to me like the proportion of arsenic side is higher than the proportion of chemo sides. It looks like the arsenic is actually a better treatment than not. But what would be my assumption if I was doing a two proportion test? What would be the assumption about P arsenic minus P chemo as my null? what would the difference be? 0. We would assume that they're the same, that P arsenic equals P chemo. Does that make sense? So you can write it as P arsenic equals P chemo, or P arsenic minus P chemo equals 0. I like to write it like this because that's the way we write it in the test statistic. Okay, we'll get into that in a second. So our alternative hypothesis is P arsenic. Now again, of course, I'm going to write this in context or define what these two P's are. Okay? Minus P chemo is greater than 0. Okay? Calculator's out. Now, we're going to have to check some conditions. Okay? We're going to have to check conditions. Okay? You're actually, it's still IRS 10, but we have to do independence twice. Okay? Independence twice means I have to check independence, not only independence of the individuals in each sample, but that the two samples themselves are independent of each other. Okay? Now we're dealing with two different samples and comparing two different independent samples to get and combining them to decide is one better than the other. Okay? This is a two-proportion z-test. You guys are going to laugh, but I was in the hospital and I actually got on Google and I found an online calculator to run this test because I wanted to see if they were fudging their p-values or not. So I tested it. Now, without going into the details of this, we'll do this next time. There are probably a few questions on this that I have, like particularly the sample size. Do we have 10 successes and 10 failures? No, but we're also dealing with cancer treatments, and if only 1 out of the 66 people died, then it's probably pretty cool, you know, that it might be actually working and it might be worth trying and testing the statistics on it. So, we're going to run the calculations after we state these. Okay, we're not going to do that today, but Z is equal to P hat arsenic minus P hat chemo. So, in other words, what is the difference between the two real measured proportions that we got down there, and we want to subtract that from the difference in our hypothesized proportion, which is 0 usually. So it'll be like minus 0 here. Now, what we have here is 65 out of 66 minus, what's the other one? 65
out of 72.
65 out of 72. Yeah, like that. Minus 0. Now this will get a little bit weird because we're going to use a standard error here. Okay? When you subtract two proportions, what do you normally do? When you subtract two random variables, what do you have to do to the variances? You have to add the variances. So in a normal case, we will do, or not in a normal case, our gut reaction is going to be to take P1, like P1 Q1 over N1 plus P2 Q2 over N2, which is adding the two variances and square rooting them. But because of we don't want one particular thing, one proportion to have too much control, we use what we call a p-pooled, which is just adding the two numerators and adding the two denominators in both cases. So it'll be like, we'll get into this next time, it's called a p-pooled, but it's basically p-pooled, q-pooled over 66 plus p-pooled, q-pooled over 72. P-pooled equals 65 plus 65 over 66 plus 72. That gives us a little bit more of a spread of variability. Okay? Doesn't let one of the proportions overtake the variability too much. All right? Now, menu. Let's go menu, statistics. menu statistics. This is a Z-score, right? Okay, menu statistics. One, we're going to go ahead and just run the test. 2 proportion Z-test. We're going to put 65 out of 66. 65 out of menu statistics test, stat tests. 2 proportion Z-test. 65 out of 66. No, 65, 66, and 65, 72. And we're doing a greater than test because we want P1 to be greater than P2, right? And then hit OK. And what was your test statistic? What is your Z-score here? 2.06. Hey, I'll wait for it. What'd you get? What's your p-value? 0.02. And you know what that is? That is, let me go back here. This is overall survival was better with arsenic trioxide. P equals 0.02. So in other words, this p-value was calculated just doing a standard 2 proportion Z-test the way we do it in this math class. So the scientists that are studying the most complicated techniques imaginable to cure people are using the same math you're using in high school. It's pretty cool to me. Yeah, as it is, I think. Hopefully I can get this thing going again, maybe. There we go. Here. There. Okay. Now, what's our conclusion? Obviously, since our p-value was low, I'm not going to go into the whole draw the diagram. You should still, the process will not change. You will still draw the diagram, 2.06, and you're here. And the probability that Z is greater than 2.06 equals about 0.02. It was like 0.019, right? Is that what you got? Okay. So what do? We reject H0. We find sufficient evidence to suggest the arsenic treatment is actually better than the chemo. All right. Over. Then they have cumulative probability tables. Good. Look at that. Cumulative probability tables. What's the probability of months after diagnosis before probability of overall survival? Chemo, arsenic. Relapse, arsenic, chemo. So relapse probability is actually lower with arsenic. Arsenic, probability of disease-free survival, higher. Higher for event-free survival. Okay. What do you think? What do you think I chose? I chose arsenic. I'm still here. In fact, next month it'll be 5 years since I was cancer-free, so which would be cool. It's supposed to be like a momentous anniversary, like cancer-versary, but when I talked to my doctor, which is kind of disconcerting, she's like, there's no evidence to suggest anything on this disease. Nobody knows anything about it. I've been doing all this reading. I don't know anything about it. And I'm like, it's kind of sad. So I'm not sure if I should be celebrating 5 years or just embrace the positive that I'm here every day, which is also nice. We're good on time, I think. So lastly, some of the things I was thinking about when I was in the hospital, I will say I gathered the data for my liver function, my white blood count, and a few other things for over 50 blood tests over the course of a year. I had 8 or 9 bone marrow tests, during that time, where they drill into your hip and you're awake, you know, that's not fun either. But I did have some interesting things happen with my blood work, which I think is really interesting. And I can show you what that data set looks like. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. I also had some thoughts on social media. Finally, I found a decent use for Facebook. I joined a Facebook group of people who were suffering from this disease and linked up with all these people, and everybody was asking each other questions because nobody knows. It's so rare, right? There was me and one other guy in the hospital, and we both had it. He was going through chemo, I was going through arsenic. I didn't ever tell him that. But he was young, he was 28, a young guy. He's now married, 2 kids, married a lady from Spain. So both of us had happy endings. Anyway, I do think there's a use for social media, and it made me think about, I wonder if you could find people like myself who went through this and then gather data from them via social media. Of course there's trolls out there who are going to fill out fake stuff, right? But if you could actually verify that, okay, Ken had this disease, this is the treatment he did, isn't that a way to worldwide pool information that would be better than just a bunch of hospitals talking to each other? It just made me think about it. Anyway, there you have it. We can talk about the data analysis behind it. I'm happy to show you that, but we were thinking about maybe doing that with a practice sheet next time. Anyway, that's it. Any questions? No? No questions? I'm going to say one thing before I finish here. If you find the right partner in life, you'd be surprised what they'll do for you. So I was in the hospital for about 6.5 months out of 9 months. My wife rode 5 kilometers each way to the hospital on Mama Cherry every single day. Except a few days at the end when I was already cured and she told me, do you mind if I take tomorrow off? I'm talking 2014 when we had the blizzard. She was on the bike. She came to the hospital every single day. So I have a lot to be grateful for her every day. So anyway, cool. All right, Coach.